30 years after vanishing, a man in a black hoodie returns to a land the world forgot. But what his husky discovers beneath the earth will leave you speechless. The road stretched endlessly beneath the pale dawn, cracked and silver gray, winding through miles of forgotten prairie where the wind spoke in tongues older than memory. A lone truck rolled along it, its tires whispering over the frost-bitten earth. Behind the wheel sat Eli Wolfson, a man the world had long since stopped noticing. His face was carved by years of silence and grit, shadowed beneath the hood of a black sweatshirt emblazoned with a white wolf's head. The fabric was worn, the logo faded, the last relic from a life he had buried decades ago. He drove without music, without destination, guided only by the thin thread of instinct that told him to keep moving north. On the passenger seat sat Balto, a husky whose fur gleamed in the weak morning light, gray and silver with streaks of white like brushed snow. One eye was blue as Arctic ice, the other, deep amber, full of a wordless understanding. His head rested on his paws, but his ears were always alert, twitching to the rhythm of the engine's hum. Eli hadn't spoken to another soul in days. He didn't need to. The silence was his language now, one he and the dog shared without effort. He'd once been a man who built bridges and bases in places no map dared to name, a combat engineer who had seen too much destruction and learned how little could ever be rebuilt. The war had stripped him of brothers, of peace, of belief. When it ended, he had walked away from everything, carrying only a black hoodie and a dog that refused to leave his side. Now, 30 years after he'd left, the road brought him home, or what was left of it. The faded sign appeared just after dawn. Wolf's Hollow Ranch, established 1894. The wooden letters were almost devoured by ivy, the paint long since peeled away. The iron gate hung open at an awkward angle, creaking in the wind like a voice calling from another lifetime. Eli slowed the truck, his chest tightening. This was where his father had raised him, where his family had once thrived before drought and debt turned the soil to dust and hope to memory. He turned onto the gravel path, the truck jolting over forgotten ruts. When the farmhouse came into view, it was little more than a ghost. The roof sagged inward. Windows were hollow, the glass shattered like the eyes of someone who had seen too much. The barn leaned against the wind as if pleading for mercy. Fences lay scattered like bones across the field. Yet beneath all that ruin, something still breathed, faint but alive. Eli parked beside the remains of the porch and cut the engine. The silence that followed was immense. Balto jumped out first, nose to the ground, moving in precise circles like a creature mapping old memories. The air was cold but heavy with the scent of pine, wet soil, and something else. Something clean and ancient. Eli stepped down, boots crunching against the gravel. He stood still for a long time, eyes moving over the land that had made him. He could almost see it as it once was. The barn doors open, the field alive with barley, the echo of his father's laughter rolling through the air like thunder. Then the illusion broke, and only wind and decay remained. "Not much left," he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Balto lifted his head, ears pricking at the sound. He gave a short, soft bark, as if to say, "Not dead either." Eli walked toward what had once been the well at the heart of the yard. It was covered by a thick slab of wood now warped by rain and time. Kneeling beside it, he brushed away years of dust, then pried at the edge with a rusted crowbar he'd pulled from the truck bed. The wood groaned, but gave way. A wave of cold air rose up, damp and heavy. When he dropped a small stone inside, it didn't clatter against earth. It splashed. Water. He froze, staring into the darkness. The well should have been dry decades ago. Drought had killed it, just like everything else. But somewhere deep below, the land had been keeping a secret. Balto sniffed at the edge, tail twitching. Then he barked once, sharp, certain, and began digging at the nearby soil. Eli frowned, watching him. The dog wasn't random. He was following something. Instinct, maybe, or memory older than man. Eli crouched beside him, pressing his palm to the earth. It was cold but not dead. There was moisture there, a pulse just beneath the surface. He closed his eyes and for a moment imagined he could hear it, the heartbeat of the land itself. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" he whispered. Balto looked up, eyes gleaming with both colors of the sky. Eli stood and began exploring the property. The sun climbed higher, revealing more of the ruin, splintered beams, rusted plows, half-buried tools. Yet among the wreckage, there were signs of persistence. A patch of green moss clinging to stone, a few weeds pushing through cracks in the path, a faint trickle of water running beneath the barn's foundation. By noon, Eli's hands were blistered, his jeans streaked with mud. He'd pried open the old storage cellar built into the hill behind the barn. Inside, the air was cool and stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten years. Wooden shelves lined the walls, bowed under the weight of dust. In one corner sat a cedar chest. Its lid bore the initials E.W., Eleanor Wolfson, his grandmother. He remembered her stories, her belief that the land was alive, that it listened to those who treated it with respect. "The earth forgets no kindness," she used to say. "It only waits until you've earned it back." Eli knelt and opened the chest. Inside were dozens of linen sacks, sealed with wax and labeled in faded ink. Red winter barley, prairie gourd, wild pea. Seeds, saved by hands that refused to give up. He lifted one gently, feeling the dry whisper inside. Decades had passed, yet something in them remained. A quiet potential waiting for water and faith. A faint sound drew his attention. Balto, standing near the cellar wall, nose pressed to the stone, tail rigid. He pawed at a particular spot, then stepped back and barked once. Eli pressed his hand against the wall. It was damp. There was water behind it, moving, alive. He grabbed a rusted spade and began to dig. The work was slow, brutal, but Eli didn't stop. The air grew cooler, the soil darker. Then, with a final thrust, his shovel hit something that gave, and a thin line of clear water trickled through the crack, curling along the dirt floor like a thread of silver. Balto bent down and drank, tail wagging once, slow and deliberate. Eli sat back on his heels, staring at the small stream. For the first time in years, he felt something break open in his chest, something raw and bright. Hope, fragile, unfamiliar, but real. He spent the rest of the day clearing debris from the old trough, redirecting the trickle of water into a shallow basin made from a broken feed barrel. The sun dipped low, painting the ranch in gold and rust. When the last light hit the water, it shimmered, alive, defiant, eternal. As night settled, Eli built a fire in the open yard. The sky above him was a cathedral of stars. Balto lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes reflecting the flames. The man in the black hoodie sat in silence, his face half lit by firelight, half hidden in shadow. Around him stretched ruin and wilderness, yet within it pulsed something sacred, the whisper of redemption. He didn't know if he could rebuild this place. He didn't know if he deserved to. But as he watched Balto lift his head and stare into the darkness, ears flicking toward the whisper of unseen water beneath the earth, Eli felt the faintest certainty stir within him. Some things aren't gone. They're just waiting for someone to come home. The wind rose softly, carrying the scent of damp soil and pine across the yard. The stars gleamed above the black hood, above the wolf emblem stitched into his chest, and above the husky who kept watch over a sleeping land. That night, for the first time in 30 years, the land of Wolf's Hollow dreamed again. The morning light came slow and soft, filtered through a curtain of mist that hung low over the valley. Dew clung to every blade of grass, turning the ruined ranch into something fragile and luminous. The air smelled of wet earth and old wood, the scent of beginnings. Eli stirred from his bedroll inside what remained of the farmhouse, his body stiff from the cold. He sat up, rubbed the back of his neck, and listened. There it was again, that faint, rhythmic sound beneath the silence, the steady murmur of water, alive, persistent. Balto was already awake, pacing near the doorway. His coat shimmered silver in the morning haze, and his breath came in small white clouds. When he saw Eli move, he wagged his tail once and trotted outside, barking twice, sharp and expectant. Eli followed, stepping into the dawn. The pool he'd shaped from the broken feed barrel the night before had filled more during the night. The water flowed clear and cold, threading through the dirt like veins rediscovering their heart. The land around it seemed subtly changed, the grass near the edges greener, the soil less brittle beneath his boots. He crouched beside the basin, dipped his hands into the water, and let it run through his fingers. It was pure, real. The sound of it was small but steady, and something inside him responded to it, like a note that had waited too long to be played. Balto drank, then looked up, one blue eye and one amber glinting in the light. "You found it, boy," Eli said quietly. "You brought it back." The husky tilted his head, ears perked, as though listening to something Eli couldn't hear. Then he looked toward the ridge beyond the pasture, the old irrigation line that once carried water across the fields. Eli stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and nodded. "Yeah," he murmured. "Let's see if the old bones still breathe." He spent the morning clearing debris, tracing what was left of the pipe system Eleanor Wolfson had designed nearly a century before. Wooden channels cracked and swallowed by roots still lined parts of the field. It was primitive engineering, but clever, his grandmother's way of coaxing life from stubborn soil. He followed the system uphill toward the ridge, where Balto darted ahead, nose to the ground, tail cutting through the mist like a compass needle. Halfway up the slope, they found the source, a shallow outcropping of stone where the water seeped through moss and pooled briefly before sinking back into the earth. Eli knelt, brushing away leaves. Beneath them lay a narrow fissure, just wide enough to fit his hand. The stone was slick, alive with moisture. "This is it," he whispered. "The heart." He worked for hours, clearing sediment, carving a narrow channel to guide the flow downward toward the field. It was slow, deliberate labor, the kind of work that quieted the mind. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist. Sweat soaked through his hoodie, darkening the fabric around the white wolf emblem. Balto stayed close, occasionally dipping his nose into the running stream, occasionally sitting still, ears flicking toward sounds Eli couldn't hear. The soft murmur of underground water, perhaps, or the slow turning of the earth itself. By noon, the first trickles had become a thin, steady flow. Water slipped over the lip of the ridge, trickling down toward the pasture. Eli followed it, shaping trenches with his shovel, guiding it toward the basin. When the small stream finally joined the pool below, it made a sound like laughter, soft, persistent, alive. For the first time in years, Eli smiled. He sat beside Balto beneath the skeletal shade of a birch tree, sharing a piece of jerky with the dog. The land around them shimmered faintly with promise. The sound of water had changed everything. That afternoon, he drove into the nearest town, a place called Ridgetop, little more than a post office, a diner, and a hardware store that smelled of oil and cedar. He bought pipe fittings, a new spade, seedling trays, and a single packet of barley fertilizer. When he returned, a gray government truck was already parked near the gate. A woman stepped out, tall, mid-50s, with sun-browned skin and hair the color of straw tied back under a field cap. Her posture was relaxed but authoritative, the kind of stance that came from years of working outdoors. She carried a clipboard and wore a tan jacket with the County Water Division logo stitched over the breast pocket. "Mr. Wolfson?" she called. Eli approached cautiously. "That's me." She smiled, faintly but genuinely. "I'm Lauren Witt, hydrologist for North County. I heard the old Wolf's Hollow well started running again. Thought I'd see it for myself." Eli gestured toward the basin. "It's not much," he said, "but it's clean." Lauren crouched beside the water, dipping a gloved finger in. She sniffed, then smiled wider. "Birch-fed groundwater," she said softly, "untouched by nitrates. Do you know how rare that is?" He shook his head. "Your grandmother built this system, didn't she?" Eli nodded slowly. "You knew her?" "My mother did," Lauren said. "She used to say Eleanor Wolfson believed water was alive, that it listened to those who treated it kindly." Eli's throat tightened. "She said that a lot." Lauren stood, scanning the property. "You could bring this place back, you know, if you're patient. The soil still remembers what it once was. You've already got the hardest part, the flow." "I don't know," Eli muttered. "Seems like too much for one man." "Sherry," she looked at him then, not with pity, but with the sharp understanding of someone who'd carried her own ghosts. "Then maybe it's time you stopped being one." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the birches, carrying the faint sound of running water. When she left, the sun was already lowering. Eli stood in the yard, watching her truck disappear down the gravel road. Then he turned back to the field, to the soft glint of the stream cutting through the earth like a scar beginning to heal. That night, he planted. He used his grandmother's seeds, the ones that had slept in the cedar chest for decades. Barley near the northern fence line, peas along the slope, and gourds in the sunniest corner near the barn. The soil was dry and stubborn, but he worked it patiently, turning each clump with his hands, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years, small prayers to no one and nothing in particular. Balto followed him, watching with silent intensity. Occasionally he pawed at the dirt as though helping, then circled each new patch of earth before lying down nearby, as if guarding the life beneath it. When Eli finally finished, the moon had risen, a thin silver blade over the horizon. The wind had shifted, the scent of pine and water mingled with something else. Renewal. He sat on the porch steps, back against the splintered post, hood pulled over his head. Balto lay beside him, tail brushing the wood. Together they watched the darkness. From somewhere beyond the ridge came the faint call of a lone coyote. Balto's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He only looked up, his mismatched eyes reflecting the firelight. Eli reached down, resting a calloused hand on the dog's head. "You hear that?" he murmured. "The ground's talking again." The husky made a soft, contented sound, closing his eyes. And maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was something more. But as Eli listened, he could swear the water beneath the earth had taken on a rhythm. A voice. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was steady, patient, like the slow beating of a heart that had just begun to remember how to live. The man in the black hoodie lifted his gaze toward the stars, the white wolf emblem faintly visible in the moonlight, and smiled to himself. The land was listening, and somewhere deep within it, hope began to answer. The weeks that followed slipped into a rhythm so natural, it almost felt like the land had been waiting for it. Each morning, Eli rose before dawn, brewed coffee on a small propane stove, and stood at the edge of the field while Balto patrolled the perimeter. Mist rolled over the ground like a living thing, whispering through the half-grown barley. The trickle of water had turned into a modest stream now, carving its way across the soil, pooling where the seeds had taken root. What once had been barren was now breathing again. The days were long and silent, except for the sounds of work. The scrape of the shovel, the creak of the windmill he'd rebuilt, the low bark of Balto calling from the ridge when deer wandered too close to the sprouts. Every evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Eli would stand with his hood down, hands resting on the fence rail, and watch as life returned to the hollow one fragile inch at a time. Then one afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the gravel drive. The sound of polished tires on dirt felt wrong, intrusive, too smooth for this place. Balto was the first to react, rising from the shade of the barn, his fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Eli stepped forward, wiping his hands on his jeans. The vehicle came to a stop in front of the farmhouse. The door opened, and out stepped a man whose presence seemed to darken the sunlight. Arthur Blackwell. His name alone carried weight in the county, a developer with money to burn and a reputation for swallowing small towns whole. He wore a tailored suit, far too fine for the dust of Wolf's Hollow, and a gold watch that glinted when he adjusted his cufflinks. "Mr. Wolfson," Blackwell greeted smoothly, extending a hand Eli didn't take. "You've been busy." Eli's gaze stayed cold. "You're trespassing." "Just visiting," Blackwell said, his smile like glass. "Word gets around fast out here. I heard your well's running again. Impressive." Eli said nothing. Blackwell turned, looking out over the land. "You know, I've been eyeing this property for years. Shame to see it wasted on one man and his dog. I have a proposal. My company's developing a resort in the next valley. Luxury cabins, golf course, everything powered by sustainable groundwater. Your spring could support our expansion." Eli crossed his arms. "It supports this land. That's enough." Blackwell chuckled softly as though humoring a child. You misunderstand. I'm offering to buy the rights. Handsomely. You keep the ranch, I get the water. Everybody wins. No, Eli said flatly. The developer's smile faltered. You'd turn down 6 figures? For dirt and nostalgia? It's not for sale. Balto took a step closer, his growl deepening. Blackwell sighed. You're making a mistake. Once construction begins, everything here will change. The roads, the groundwater tables, even your crops. You can either profit from it or get buried under it. Eli's voice was calm but final. Get off my land. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Blackwell's expression hardened. Enjoy your solitude while it lasts, he said quietly. Sooner or later, everything bends to progress. He turned and got into the SUV. Dust followed him down the drive until both were gone, leaving only silence behind. Eli stood there for a long time. He'd dealt with men like Blackwell before, men who believed the world owed them its veins. He knew the type, and he knew they didn't stop at the word no. That night, the wind carried the faintest scent of diesel. Balto woke first, his ears pricking, his body stiff. A low growl built in his chest before Eli even opened his eyes. What is it, boy? He whispered. The dog didn't answer. He bolted for the door, barking sharply. Eli grabbed his flashlight and followed. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the field until it hit something metallic. A small drilling rig, parked near the northern ridge. 2 men worked under the cover of night, one crouched by the controls, the other feeding hoses into the ground. Hey! Eli shouted. The men froze. One of them stumbled back. Pack it up! The other barked, but Balto was already moving, sprinting toward them, with a snarl that echoed through the hollow. The man nearest the rig turned, saw the dog, and bolted toward a waiting truck. The other followed, tripping over a coil of tubing. The vehicle roared away, tires throwing gravel, disappearing into the darkness. Eli ran to the rig. The borehole was fresh, the air around it hot with friction. He could smell the oil, the machinery. His chest tightened. If they'd gone deeper, they could have cracked the aquifer and poisoned the entire valley. He shut off the equipment, his hands trembling with anger. Damn it, he hissed. By dawn, Lauren Witt was back. She examined the site with a grim expression, crouching beside the borehole. They were drilling for the same water vein, she said. Blackwell's people, no doubt. If they'd gone 10 feet deeper, it would have contaminated your source permanently. Eli's jaw clenched. Can we stop him? We can slow him down. I'll file a report with the County Environmental Board. Trespassing, unauthorized drilling, environmental hazard. It'll trigger a hearing. And if that's not enough? She met his eyes. Then we fight. For the first time since returning home, Eli felt the old pulse of purpose he'd buried after the war. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that defended. The days that followed were a blur of work and preparation. He repaired fences, reinforced the basin, and gathered evidence. Photographs, soil samples, and old maps. Lauren visited often, bringing records from the county archives. Eleanor Wolfson's handwritten notes, proving the spring had been developed solely for the ranch. At night, Eli and Balto sat beside the fire, watching the stars through the smoke. The land had grown quiet again, but beneath that quiet was tension, the stillness before a storm. Then one evening, that storm came. Balto began to pace hours before it hit, whining low, restless. The wind was hot, dry, unnaturally strong. By dusk, smoke was curling over the western ridge. The scent was unmistakable. Fire, Eli murmured. Within minutes, the county radio stations confirmed it. A wildfire had sparked near the old logging roads 15 miles out. Winds were pushing it east, toward Wolf's Hollow. Lauren arrived just before nightfall, her truck coated in ash. It's moving fast, she said, climbing out. If it jumps the ridge, you'll have less than an hour. Eli nodded, already pulling equipment from the barn. Shovels, buckets, a coil of hose. Together they began carving fire breaks around the property, shallow trenches cutting through the dry earth. The work was desperate and endless. Sweat mixed with soot. Their throats burned with smoke. Balto moved between them, herding stray animals away from the flames, his fur glowing ember red in the flickering light. By midnight, the fire was at the ridge. Trees glowed like torches. Embers rained from the sky, swirling through the wind. The roar was deafening, not just sound but force, a living wall of heat. When one ember landed on the hay barn, Eli ran. The roof caught instantly, flames licking the old timber. He grabbed the hose, turned the valve, but no water came. The pressure had dropped. He swore, coughed, and climbed the ladder toward the tank. The valve was jammed tight, rusted, unmoving. "Come on," he growled, straining against it. His hand slipped, his lungs screaming from the heat. Then through the smoke, something tugged at his sleeve, teeth, strong and insistent. Balto. The dog pulled again, harder, barking through the roar. Eli steadied himself, set his jaw, and twisted the valve with everything he had. Metal screamed, then gave. Water exploded from the pipe, cascading over the barn in a torrent. Steam filled the air. The fire hissed, buckled, then retreated. Eli collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. Balto pressed against his side, trembling, singed fur reeking of smoke, but alive. Hours later, the county fire crews arrived. The blaze was redirected, the ridge scorched black, but Wolf's Hollow still stood. When dawn came, the land was painted in ashes, gray, smoking, silent, yet the stream still flowed. The water had survived, so had they. Eli sat on the porch with a bandage on his arm, watching the horizon where the fire had passed. Balto lay beside him, one paw wrapped in gauze, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. "You did good, boy," Eli murmured, voice barely audible. The husky lifted his head and rested it on Eli's knee, breathing slow and steady. For a moment the two of them sat like that, surrounded by silence and ruin. Then Eli heard it again, faint, hidden beneath the smell of smoke and wet earth. The water, still running, still alive. The man in the black hoodie leaned back, pulled the hood over his head and closed his eyes. The wolf stitched on his chest was stained with ash, but it hadn't burned. Neither had the land. They had both endured the fire, and when the wind shifted, carrying the clean scent of damp soil through the hollow, Eli smiled, weary, broken, but undefeated. The wolf and the fire had met, and the wolf had won. The world that greeted Eli after the fire was not the same one he had known before. The forest to the west lay silent and black, its trees reduced to ash-gray pillars that reached toward the sky like the ribs of something ancient and broken. Yet within that ruin, life stirred, shy and resilient. The first shoots of green appeared within a week, delicate against the soot. A red-tailed hawk circled above the ridge, and from the stream, still running clear and strong, came the whisper of water, the sound of something that refused to die. Eli worked through the recovery with quiet determination. The burned fences were replaced, the barn roof patched with salvaged metal. The field, half scorched, half spared, was turned again by hand. Each morning began the same. The man in the black hoodie with the wolf emblem walked the perimeter of Wolf's Hollow, boots sinking into damp earth, and Balto at his side, limping slightly but unbowed. Together they rebuilt, one piece of the world at a time. The fire had burned away more than brush and timber. It had stripped everything to its core, revealing what mattered. The land was no longer a ruin to resurrect. It was a living thing to protect. And in its heartbeat, Eli began to hear his own. Lauren Witt came often during those weeks, bringing water samples, paperwork, and quiet companionship. The county had confirmed Blackwell's violation, illegal drilling, environmental endangerment, and reckless negligence. But the battle wasn't over yet. Blackwell had filed appeals, claiming the spring extended beneath his property. The case was headed for a formal hearing. One late afternoon, Lauren stood beside Eli at the water basin, sunlight flickering through her straw-colored hair. "If we win this," she said, "they'll name it a heritage spring. That means permanent protection. No corporation can touch it." Eli nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "And if we lose?" "Then this place dies," she said simply. Balto raised his head, ears twitching as though he understood every word. They worked late into the evening preparing documents, tracing property lines, cross-referencing his grandmother's journals. The farmhouse table became a battlefield of maps, survey notes, and photos. Every night after Lauren left, Eli sat in the flickering lamplight with Balto beside him, staring at the land outside, the same land that had tried to destroy itself, and yet still whispered for him to fight. The day of the hearing came gray and heavy with rain. Eli wore his black hoodie, washed but still smelling faintly of smoke. The white wolf on his chest gleamed under the courthouse lights as he stood beside Lauren in the echoing chamber. Balto sat quietly at his feet, tail curled around his paws like a sentry. Across the room sat Arthur Blackwell, his sharp suit immaculate, his expression carved from polished stone. He didn't glance at Eli, not once. His lawyers spoke for him, in smooth, rehearsed tones about development, profit, and regional benefit. They presented diagrams, models, charts predicting responsible use of natural resources. Each word tasted like rust. When it was Lauren's turn, her voice was calm but cut through the room like a clear bell. She spoke not of profit but of preservation, of Eleanor Wolfson's system, of water purity, of how the aquifer's natural pressure supported the entire ecosystem. She showed photographs, the rebirth of barley, the deer returning to graze, the stream that had survived the fire. Then she played the final recording, a night vision video from Eli's camera. Two men drilling under cover of darkness, Blackwell's logo gleaming on the rig. Gasps filled the chamber. Blackwell's jaw clenched. His lawyer objected, but the judge waved him silent. Eli said little when his turn came. He didn't have the polish or the words. He simply stood, hood up, hands calloused, and spoke from somewhere deeper than reason. "I came back to this place because I thought it was dead," he said, "but it wasn't. It was waiting. My grandmother used to say the earth doesn't forget kindness. It just waits for someone to remember its name. This water doesn't belong to me. It belongs to life, to every root, every animal that drinks from it. You take that away for money, and you don't just kill the land. You kill what makes people human." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. When the decision came 2 days later, the words felt like rain after drought. The Wolf's Hollow Spring was officially declared a heritage ecological source, permanently protected under state law. Blackwell was fined for violations and barred from future development within the region. His resort plans were terminated. Eli stood on the courthouse steps as the rain fell, soaking his hoodie until the wolf emblem glistened. Lauren was beside him, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "We did it. The land did it." Balto barked once, tail sweeping the wet pavement. Word spread quickly. The story of the man in the black hoodie and his husky appeared in small-town papers and local news broadcasts. Reporters called him the guardian of Wolf's Hollow. But Eli wanted none of the attention. He went home, back to the sound of the water and the rhythm of the land. The months that followed were unlike any before. Volunteers began arriving. Farmers, veterans, students. Some brought tools, others brought seeds, and a few brought nothing but time and strong hands. They helped rebuild the barn, laid irrigation channels, and planted new crops. The old ranch became something more than a farm. It became a community. Lauren's idea turned into reality, a nature and recovery center built on the foundation of the old granary. There, injured animals were treated, veterans worked the fields, and children from nearby schools came to learn about water, soil, and stewardship. The place pulsed with life. Eli rarely spoke of himself, but he became a symbol anyway. Not for victory, but for persistence. He still wore his hoodie, its wolf logo faded and patched, but it had become something of a legend around the county. To everyone else, it meant endurance. To him, it was simply armor, a reminder of who he used to be and what he had chosen to become. Balto grew older that year. His stride slowed, his muzzle whitened. Yet his spirit remained fierce. Every morning, he followed Eli to the water's edge, lying down as the man inspected the flow. Sometimes Eli would catch him staring at the horizon, as if remembering a time when the land had burned and they had fought side by side against the fire. Sometimes Eli would sit beside him, resting a hand on his thick fur, saying nothing at all. On a late autumn afternoon, when the barley fields shimmered gold and the wind carried the smell of pine and cold water, the county held a small festival at the ranch. The return of the water. Lanterns hung from the barn. Children splashed in the irrigation channels. A band played slow, rolling bluegrass beneath the birches. Neighbors gathered around long wooden tables, sharing bread, soup, and laughter. Eli stood near the water basin, hood down for once. He looked out at the faces, the young, the old, the scarred, the healed. This was what it meant to belong again. This was what his grandmother had meant all along. Balto wove through the crowd, tail wagging, greeting everyone with quiet dignity. When he returned to Eli's side, the man crouched and scratched behind his ears. "We did good, boy," he whispered. "The land remembers." The husky gave a small huff of agreement, pressing his head against Eli's chest. As twilight deepened, a soft wind stirred through Wolf's Hollow. It moved through the barley, across the birch leaves, down into the spring. The water caught the lantern light and reflected it skyward, a living mirror. In its surface, Eli saw his reflection, older, weathered, but no longer haunted. The black hoodie clung to him like a second skin, the white wolf faint yet shining. Beside him, Balto's eyes, one blue, one amber, glimmered with the same stubborn fire that had carried them both through everything. He closed his eyes and listened. The stream murmured like a prayer. The earth beneath him throbbed faintly with life. It was then he understood. This had never been about reclaiming land. It was about resurrection, of soil, of spirit, of faith. Because grace, like water, never truly dies. It only waits beneath the surface for someone willing to dig deep enough to find it again. That night, when the lanterns dimmed and the last guest drifted home, Eli sat on the porch, sharpening his knife under the cold glow of a waxing moon. Balto lay beside him, head resting on his boot. Across the valley, the wind carried the low hum of distant owls. Somewhere beneath the ground, water whispered its endless song. Eli smiled faintly. "We're home," he murmured. Balto's tail brushed against the wood, one last slow beat of agreement. The moonlight touched the faded wolf emblem on Eli's chest, and in that stillness, the land itself seemed to breathe, as if it too remembered the name of the man who had brought it back to life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of hope, redemption, and second chances. Comment below and tell us,